The wind cut at my skin like razors as I walked down the last street in Cedar Falls. My 7-month belly felt like lead, and every step took an effort I could barely sustain. The 17th door had just slammed in my face minutes earlier, and now I faced the harsh reality. There was no one else in town willing to help me. Please subscribe to the channel and leave a like for more stories like this. Samuel had been dead for 3 months. The debts he left consumed our small house, our furniture, even my wedding ring. I'd sold everything, begged everyone, and still couldn't scrounge up enough money for a decent meal. My stomach constantly rumbled, but it was the baby's hunger that terrified me most. I felt his movements getting weaker each day. The storm intensified as I left the town limits. Thick snowflakes began to fall, turning the world into a white, icy blur. I knew I should turn back, find shelter somewhere, but there was no place for me in Cedar Falls. Every family had already made it clear that a pregnant widow was a burden they couldn't carry. Then I saw the gates, huge, imposing, made of wrought iron with details that screamed wealth and power. A golden plaque gleamed even under the snow. Ironwood Ranch. I'd heard of this place. Everyone knew Nathaniel Blackwood, the richest man in Dakota Territory. They said he'd built an empire on land others considered impossible to work. My legs trembled as I approached the gates. It wasn't just the cold, it was fear. Men like Blackwood didn't welcome people like me. But when another gust of wind hit me and I felt the baby stir weakly, I knew I had no choice. It was this or die on the road. I knocked on the gates with hands already numb from the cold. The sound echoed into the void, swallowed almost immediately by the howling wind. I waited, knocked again, harder this time. Nothing. My vision started to dim at the edges. The world spun, and I felt my knees hit the wet snow. That's when I heard heavy footsteps approaching. A deep voice cut through the icy air. "Who's there?" I tried to answer, but only a whimper escaped my throat. The gates creaked open, and I saw a tall figure silhouetted against the golden light coming from the house in the distance. Nathaniel Blackwood was exactly as I'd imagined, imposing, with broad shoulders and a presence that dominated the space around him. His dark eyes scanned me with an expression I couldn't decipher. For a moment I thought he'd send me away just like everyone else had. "My God," he mumbled, and before I could process his words, I felt strong arms lifting me from the snow. "Eleanor," he shouted toward the house. "Eleanor, come quickly." Consciousness came and went as he carried me. I remembered the warmth of the house enveloping me like a hug, the smell of burning wood and cooking food. An older woman, who I assumed was Eleanor, appeared with towels and blankets. Her hands were gentle as she helped me out of my soaked clothes. "When was the last time you ate?" Blackwood's voice sounded different now, softer, concerned. I tried to answer, but the words jumbled. 2 days? 3? I'd lost count. Eleanor brought a bowl of hot soup. The first sip burned my throat, but it was the most delicious thing I'd ever tasted. I felt the baby move more strongly, as if he too was grateful for the food. "What's your name?" Blackwood asked, sitting in a nearby chair. There was something in his eyes I couldn't quite place, a deep sadness, as if he carried his own ghosts. "Victoria Bennett," I managed to whisper between spoonfuls of soup. I'm so sorry to bother you. I had nowhere else to go." He nodded slowly, as if he understood more than I'd said. "You can stay tonight. Tomorrow, we'll talk about what to do." That first night at Ironwood Ranch, lying in a soft bed for the first time in months, I felt something I'd forgotten existed. Hope. I didn't know that this dark, silent man would become my salvation, nor that I would become his. I didn't imagine that behind that facade of power and control was a broken heart, waiting for someone brave enough to help him heal. What I did know was that, for the first time in a long time, my baby and I were safe. And sometimes when you're lost in the storm, safety is all you need to start anew. Life at Ironwood Ranch had become my new reality for almost 2 months. Nathaniel and I had developed a comfortable routine. I took care of the workers' injuries, helped Eleanor with household management, and he had become someone I could completely trust. Our wedding was set for next week, a union that started as convenience but had blossomed into something much deeper. I was organizing medical supplies in the pantry when Eleanor rushed in, her face ashen. "Victoria, there's a man at the front door. He says he needs to speak with you urgently." Her voice trembled in a way that immediately put me on alert. I walked to the main living room, my belly now quite prominent at 8 months pregnant. An elegant man stood by the fireplace, wearing an expensive suit and holding a leather briefcase. His eyes scanned me from head to toe with an expression that made me feel like merchandise being evaluated. "You must be Victoria Bennett," he said, his voice soft but carrying something sinister. "My name is Charles Morrison from Denver. I have some documents here that I believe will be of interest to you." Nathaniel appeared beside me almost instantly, as if sensing my tension. His presence reassured me, but I could feel the stiffness in his muscles. "Who are you, and what do you want with my fiancée?" Morrison smiled, but there was no warmth in that smile. "Ah, Mr. Blackwood, good to meet you. I'm afraid there's a small problem with your wedding plans." He opened his briefcase and pulled out several papers. "You see, Mrs. Bennett's late husband, Samuel, incurred some significant debts with my company before his death. Debts which, according to territorial law, automatically passed to the widow." My blood ran cold. "What debts?" Samuel never mentioned anything about debts to anyone from Denver. "Well, men often hide these things from their wives," Morrison replied with false sympathy, "especially when they involve gambling and failed investments. Here are the contracts he signed, promising full payment or—" He paused dramatically. "Personal collateral." Nathaniel took the papers from Morrison's hands, his eyes quickly scanning the contents. I saw his jaw clench. "These documents claim Victoria owes your company $15,000. That's absurd." "Absurd or not, it's legally binding," Morrison retorted. "And since Mrs. Bennett clearly has no means to pay off this debt, she becomes the legal property of the Morrison Trading Company until the debt is paid through labor." I felt as if the floor had disappeared beneath my feet. "Property? You're talking about slavery." "I'm talking about law, my dear, territorial law that allows debtors to work off their obligations." His eyes gleamed with a malice that made me instinctively recoil. "Of course, there's an alternative. If you marry me, I might consider forgiving the debt as a wedding gift." Nathaniel stepped forward, his voice low and dangerous. "Get off my property, now." Morrison wasn't intimidated. "I'm afraid I can't do that, Mr. Blackwood. I have a court order here that allows me to take Mrs. Bennett with me today." He produced another document. "Unless, of course, you want to pay the $15,000 immediately." "I'll pay," Nathaniel said without hesitation. "How much do you really want?" The question caught Morrison off guard for just a second, but it was enough for me to realize something was wrong with the whole situation. "It's not about money, Mr. Blackwood. It's about legal principles. Mrs. Bennett must come with me." "You're lying," I said suddenly, my mind working quickly. "If it was really about money, you'd accept Nathaniel's payment immediately. You want something else." Morrison's smile turned crueler. "You're smarter than I thought. Yes, I want you, Victoria. A beautiful, educated woman with medical skills. You're worth much more than $15,000 on the right market." Nathaniel moved so fast I could barely keep up. One second he was beside me, the next he had Morrison pinned against the wall, a hand at his throat. "If you touch her, I'll kill you." "Violence won't change the law," Morrison managed to say, though his voice was strangled. "I have men waiting outside. If anything happens to me, they have orders to take the woman by force." Nathaniel released him, but remained dangerously close. "How much time do we have?" "Until tomorrow at noon. After that, I'll come for her with the sheriff." Morrison adjusted his suit, trying to regain his composure. "Of course, if she agrees to marry me today, we can settle this civilly." After Morrison left, I collapsed into a chair, trembling uncontrollably. Nathaniel knelt beside me, his large, warm hands covering mine. "I won't let this happen, Victoria. I swear it on everything sacred." "How can we fight the law?" I asked, tears streaming down my face. "If these documents are legal, Nat, then we'll find a way to make them illegal." His voice was filled with a fierce determination I'd never heard before. "Caleb," he shouted, "saddle my horse. I'm going to Cedar Falls to speak with Judge Thompson." I spent the longest night of my life waiting for Nathaniel to return. Eleanor tried to comfort me, but I knew we were facing something much bigger than we could control. Morrison wasn't just a common swindler. He had resources, connections, and clearly had planned this carefully. When Nathaniel finally returned the next morning, his face was grim. Judge Thompson is out of town. He won't be back until next week. But I did get some interesting information about our friend Morrison. He sat beside me, holding my hand. The Morrison Trading Company was only registered 6 months ago. Samuel died 4 months ago. It's impossible for him to have incurred debts with a company that didn't exist when he supposedly signed these contracts. I felt a spark of hope. So the documents are fake? Completely. But proving it is another story. Morrison is smart. He falsified the dates on the documents to make them appear older than Samuel's death. Nathaniel squeezed my hand. But I have a plan. Before he could explain, we heard horses approaching. Morrison had returned, and this time he wasn't alone. Through the window, I saw 3 armed men with him, plus someone who appeared to be a law enforcement officer. "It's noon," Morrison announced when Eleanor let him in. "I've come for my property." "She's not your property," Nathaniel replied, positioning himself between Morrison and me. "Sheriff Williams disagrees." Morrison nodded to the uniformed man. "Show them the order, Sheriff." The sheriff, an older man with an uncomfortable look, extended a paper. "I'm sorry, Mr. Blackwood, but the law is the law. Mrs. Bennett needs to come with us." It was then that I felt the first contractions. The tension, the fear, the stress of the past few days finally took their toll. I doubled over in pain, one hand on my belly, the other gripping Nathaniel's arm. "The baby," I managed to whisper. "I think it's coming." Morrison seemed genuinely surprised for a moment, but quickly regained his composure. "Even better. 2 for the price of 1. Nathaniel turned to him with a fury that made even the armed men back away. "If you don't leave my house now, I swear there won't be a law in this territory that stops me from killing you with my own hands." "Threats won't change anything," Morrison replied, but there was nervousness in his voice now. "Sheriff, execute the order." The sheriff took a hesitant step toward me, but stopped when another contraction hit me, stronger this time. "Perhaps we should wait until after the child is born," he suggested. "No," Morrison said firmly. "The order doesn't specify medical conditions. She comes now." It was at that moment that I realized Nathaniel was right about one thing. Sometimes you need to fight for what you love, even when the odds are against you. And I was ready to fight. "I'm not going anywhere," I declared, my voice steadier than I felt inside. Another contraction hit me, but this time I managed to stay on my feet, holding onto Nathaniel's arm. "If you want to take me, you'll have to drag me out of here, and everyone will see exactly what kind of man you are." Morrison hesitated for a moment. He had counted on fear and submission, not resistance. "Sheriff, execute the order." Sheriff Williams looked uncomfortably between us. "Mr. Morrison, perhaps we should wait until the medical situation resolves itself. A woman in labor." "The law makes no exceptions for medical convenience," Morrison interrupted, but I could see sweat forming on his forehead. "Execute the order, or I will report your negligence to higher authorities." It was then that Nathaniel stepped forward, his voice cutting through the air like a blade. "Sheriff Williams, before you execute any order, I'd like you to examine these documents." He pulled out a folder I hadn't noticed before. "I received this information via telegraph from Denver this morning." Morrison visibly paled. "What documents?" "Official records of the Morrison Trading Company," Nathaniel calmly replied, handing the papers to the sheriff. "Interesting to discover that your company was registered in March 1888. My late brother-in-law, Samuel Bennett, died in January 1888. Explain to me how a dead man can incur debts with a company that didn't exist." The silence that followed was deafening. Morrison tried to maintain his composure, but I saw his hands tremble slightly. "There must be some error in the dates." "There is no error," Nathaniel continued, his voice gaining strength. "I also have here a sworn statement from the real Samuel Bennett, not my brother-in-law, but a living and well man in Denver, whose signature you forged on the documents. He is willing to testify that he never incurred debts with you and that his signature was falsified." The sheriff examined the documents, his expression growing increasingly serious. "Mr. Morrison, these are official records. If they are true, they're lies." Morrison exploded, finally losing his composure. "Blackwood is fabricating evidence to protect his property." "My property?" Nathaniel's voice became dangerously low. Victoria is no one's property. She is a free woman, and if you try to touch her again, I will personally make sure you spend the rest of your miserable life in prison. I felt another contraction, more intense this time, and couldn't suppress a groan. Eleanor appeared beside me instantly, helping me sit in a nearby chair. "The baby is coming," she whispered. "We can't delay any longer." Morrison saw an opportunity in my vulnerability. "See? She needs proper medical care. I can provide that in Denver. Here, in the middle of nowhere, both she and that child could die." "She has the best medical care right here," Nathaniel retorted, "and she's not going anywhere with you." The sheriff folded the documents and returned them to Nathaniel. "Mr. Morrison, based on this evidence, I cannot execute this order. There are clear discrepancies that need to be investigated by a proper court." "You're making a grave mistake, Williams," Morrison threatened. "I have connections in Denver that can end your career. And I have connections throughout the entire territory that can end your freedom," Nathaniel replied coldly. "I suggest you leave my property before I decide to file formal charges of fraud, extortion, and attempted kidnapping." Morrison looked around, realizing he had completely lost control of the situation. His armed men seemed uncomfortable, clearly not expecting things to take this turn. "This isn't over," he said, trying to maintain some dignity. "I'll be back with better lawyers and stronger evidence." "No," Nathaniel said with a finality that made me shiver. "This is over now. Sheriff, I'd like you to escort Mr. Morrison out of the territory, and if he returns, I want him arrested immediately for disturbing the peace." As Morrison and his men were escorted out, I felt the tension finally leave my body, only to be replaced by a much more intense pain. The baby was definitely coming, and there was no delaying it any longer. "Nathaniel," I managed to say between contractions, I need you here." He knelt beside me, taking my hand. "I'm not going anywhere. Eleanor, have Caleb fetch Dr. Morrison from Cedar Falls." "There's no time," Eleanor said, already preparing towels and hot water. "This baby isn't waiting. Victoria, you need to go to the bedroom now." The next few hours passed in a blur of pain, sweat, and determination. Nathaniel stayed by my side the entire time, holding my hand, whispering words of encouragement, being the anchor I needed to get through it. When I finally heard my son's first cry, I felt as if the whole world had changed. Eleanor quickly cleaned him and placed him in my arms, a perfect baby boy, small but strong, with lungs that clearly worked very well. "He's beautiful," Nathaniel whispered, gently touching the baby's tiny hand. There were tears in his eyes, and I realized this moment meant as much to him as it did to me. "Our son," I said, looking into Nathaniel's eyes. "He's our son." Nathaniel kissed my forehead softly. "Our family," he agreed, finally complete. 3 days later, when I was strong enough to stand, Nathaniel and I were married in a simple ceremony in the main living room of Ironwood Ranch. Judge Thompson had returned from his trip and made sure to come in person to officiate our union. Eleanor held our son during the ceremony, and when the judge declared us husband and wife, I felt I had finally found my place in the world. News about Morrison spread quickly throughout the territory. We discovered he had tried the same scam with other vulnerable widows, but our victory encouraged other women to come forward. Within a month, he was in prison, facing multiple charges of fraud. 5 years had passed since that terrible night when Morrison tried to take me. Now, as I watch our son Thomas playing in the garden with his 2 younger brothers, twins who were born 2 years ago, I can hardly believe how our life has changed. Nathaniel became not just my husband, but my partner in every sense. Together, we expanded Ironwood Ranch to become the largest and most prosperous in the territory. He uses his political influence to advocate for the rights of women, especially widows and single mothers, while I established a medical clinic that serves needy families throughout the county. Our home became a refuge for women in desperate situations, just as I was on that stormy night. We've helped more than 20 women rebuild their lives, find dignified work, or marry for love, not out of necessity. Nathaniel often says that I saved him as much as he saved me. He had built walls around his heart after losing Rebecca, but our love taught him that it was possible to love again without betraying the memory of the past. Now, he speaks of Rebecca with fondness, not pain, and our children know the story of their father's first wife with respect and love. As for me, I learned that sometimes the greatest blessings come disguised as the greatest challenges. If Samuel hadn't died, if I hadn't become desperate, if I hadn't faced that terrible storm, I would never have found Nathaniel. I would never have discovered my own strength, never would have become the woman I am today. Today, when young women come to me for advice, I always tell them the same thing. Never accept being treated as someone's property. Fight for your dignity, for your children, for your right to choose your own destiny. And remember that, even in the darkest moments, there is always hope for a new dawn. Dakota Territory became 2 states last year, and Nathaniel was elected to the state Senate. We use our position to continue fighting for the rights of vulnerable women and families. Our story became a local legend, the woman who arrived as a beggar and became a queen, the man who thought his heart had died but discovered he could still love. Please subscribe to the channel and leave a like for more stories like this. But for us, it's not a legend. It's simply our life, imperfect, sometimes difficult, but full of love, purpose, and hope. And when I look at our children playing in the garden where I once collapsed in the snow, I know that every moment of pain was worth it to get here.